All right, well, we're back and we are in the mud. We're going to get super muddy. You're going to hate the mud by the end of this fucking race. Anyways, so this was my first muddy cross race and it was insane. You can see all the mud kicking up already. Look at this shit. It's insane. Mud everywhere. Pools of water. And so, you know, we're going to talk about the lessons you can learn from a muddy race. And look at this. Lesson number 1, have a way better start than I did. I look at all these people just passing me like crazy. You need to be way up there. I think it's almost more important in a muddy race to be in the front because you're going to get stuck behind people. There's going to be stops and crashes. You're going to be able to have better lines. You're not going to get boxed in like I do right here, or stuck behind people and slowed down. You're just gonna have a much better race if you start just that much better, just a little better in a muddy race than you would on a dry race. So I did pretty poorly about that in this race, and you just basically the way to win that is just go as hard as you possibly can until you can't. That's how you have a good start. Didn't do that well. So we're going to talk some other lessons about this race as well. So lesson number 1, have a good start. The other lessons are basically being able to recognize when to run or ride. Look at this. Maybe I should have been running that. But we're going to talk about how to recognize when running or riding is faster and basically how to corner in the mud. So in this section, I scouted pretty well, and I knew I was going to have to get off my bike. All these other people that you can see ahead maybe didn't scout and didn't realize that they would, but I recognized that I was not going to be able to ride up this and then over that railway tie. So I ran it and maybe got a position or two right there. But there's some other examples throughout this race about figuring out how to know what's faster. One of the best things I can say is that if you can ride it in practice or scouting lap, then maybe you should do it. So in this, I was able to hit decently in the scouting lap, but that was tricky, and it gets wetter, so it's even more difficult. Here's a section where I knew I could bike it because it's the most muddy section of the course, but there is some green. And so basically, if you get into a straighter section that you can ride in the mud, just look for any green that you can. That'll give you some traction, hopefully get you a little bit faster than just slipping and sliding or letting your rear wheel slip out behind you. So here's another section. Look at this guy on the left. He was running his bike. That guy comes up later, and he ran a couple of these sections. Here I am stutter stepping to get to a green section, and I maybe should have been running that. Might have been a little bit faster. There's this section here was particularly slippery, and I'm just stutter stepping it. Look at this. That should be a sign for you that if you have to do these stutter stops, maybe you're going to be faster if you can run it. This back section of the course, I didn't scout this back section because my bike was super muddy and I wanted to wash it off before I started my race. And this section as well. So, you know, if you can scout, make sure you can, you know, wash your bike afterwards before you start. Otherwise, you might want to consider skipping that scout lap. Please tell me if you think otherwise. But so this other idea about running versus riding, I'm going to stutter step here as well. Look at the stop, stutter, and then try again. So that should be a good sign of maybe running that corner would have been better. Here's a section where this guy's going to get off his bike and run it, and he runs pretty far up the hill and gets a couple seconds on me. So you also kind of have to figure out how far you can run it. It's not just here and then you jump on. Maybe it's all the way to the top of the hill and then you jump. That you run it. So that's sort of a tricky deal. The other thing is cornering. I had a tough time with finding this, the best way to get around these muddy corners. Obviously in the mud you get a little nervous that you're going to fall, but the straightest line is the fastest, and so that means it's outside, inside, and then outside. And that sometimes means that it might seem like there's nothing green around you and you won't have any traction, but that might end up being the fastest route. So you gotta kind of figure out how to judge that. This section was, I was, stutter stopping every single time. Here I am again. That should have been another sign. But in this section or this turn coming up here, I was doing a lot. Oh, here we go again. This guy is just running it past me. And actually, that's a really good thing if you're going to run it. If you have to run it, try to run it to the point where you're ahead of the guy who's riding it. And then once you get there, you're ahead of him. And here I go inside. I go inside a lot of this race, and that causes a lot of the stutter steps. So that should be another sign of whether you should run it or not. But, in terms of cornering, if you can take that outside, that should be the fastest line because it's the straightest. Here's this guy again. Is going to show you a good example of why you should run it past the guy who's riding it ahead of you. Because look at him. He's running it. Now he's ahead of the guy who was riding his bike. So super important to figure out in a mud race. Here I try to go as green as possible and then slip between these two guys. And that brings me to my final point is, you got to practice in the mud. If you can change your mindset to really love the mud and learn to live in it, then you can basically accept that you're going to die in it. So, if you can practice and practice and practice, you can push yourself to the limit, figure out what those limits are in the mud, and then experiment with gear, maybe figure out some other tricks to practicing in the mud that you may not have had by learning in a race. But practicing, again, in the mud is going to be super important. And it's also really convenient, I found, to have a really convenient really helpful to have a convenient bike wash. Basically, if you're really able to quickly and easily wash your bike all the time, you can practice in the mud all you want, right? Who cares if you go practice in the mud because you're going to come back, wash your bike off really quickly, put some chain lube on again, wash your clothes, and then be right back out if you need to the next day. So, practicing in the mud can be made easy. Here we go again, inside, and then I go inside, stutter step. This is hard to watch. So this was what I learned this race from this muddy race. My one fall comes right here. Whew. Nothing got hurt. We're good. But hopefully you learned something, and let me know what you think about cross riding in the mud.